My name is Sylvia, and I'm a 38-year-old housewife working part-time. My daughter, Melody, graduated from college last year and has moved out, so now I live with my 50-year-old husband, Victor. With Melody's departure, I find I have a bit more time on my hands these days. Victor and I met on a blind date and clicked immediately. Our relationship progressed quickly, and we were married not long after. We were soon blessed with a daughter. Even though it was my first experience with parenting, I was determined to give it my all. I left my job to become a full-time stay-at-home mom, handling all the housework and childcare on my own. Victor, however, wasn't supportive. When he finished work early, he would go out drinking, and on his days off, he preferred to entertain himself elsewhere. If he wasn't out, he'd simply lounge around in his room. His attitude was dismissive, as if housewives had an easy life and enjoyed living without contributing. His outdated perspective on my role often left me frustrated. I've considered divorce, of course, but I hesitated. I didn't want to end our marriage just because he was uncooperative and had a sharp tongue. I decided it would be better for my daughter if both parents stayed together, so I adjusted my perspective. I resolved to raise her on my own terms, relying on my husband only for his paycheck. This approach worked for a while, but things took a turn when my daughter started middle school. My husband began siphoning money from our household funds, claiming it was for company expenses or business entertainment. This resulted in considerable financial strain on the family. To help alleviate the pressure, I took on a part-time job. Despite my efforts, my husband continued to complain about everything. He belittled my work, dismissing it as insignificant because I was just a part-timer, and implied that any work a woman did was inherently easy. His lack of respect for women in general was clear, though I maintained a facade of compliance while silently planning to get my revenge. One cold winter night, the house phone rang. I answered to find it was my uncle on the other end. My mother's brother called to tell me that she had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance and was in critical condition. He gave me the name of the hospital, and I quickly prepared to leave. I woke up my husband, urging him to get the car ready so we could drive there. Since my father passed away a few years ago, my mother had been living alone. My father had been a strong, dependable man, and I cherished the memories of my mother smiling beside him. Even after his death, it felt like he was still there in spirit, watching over her. Now, faced with the possibility of losing my mother, I found it hard to believe. As I sat in the passenger seat, I prayed fervently for her to hold on. When we finally arrived at the hospital, my uncle and some other relatives were already there, waiting anxiously. According to what I heard, my mother had suddenly woken up in the middle of the night with severe chest pains. Torn about whether to call an ambulance, she first reached out to my uncle. After he strongly urged her to seek help, she finally called for an ambulance. My uncle, who lived nearby, quickly went to her house and accompanied her to the emergency room. He informed me of her situation as soon as he knew where they were taking her. I am deeply grateful to my uncle for his swift and compassionate assistance. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my mother unconscious in her bed, unable to speak to her. I called out to her, but there was no response. The doctor who examined her explained that her condition was critical, and it would be some time before we could know more. My relatives and I gathered around, calling out to her and offering words of encouragement. Amidst this, we began discussing the arrangements that would need to be made. Suddenly, I heard a voice of frustration. It was my husband, complaining loudly, it's finally over. You woke me up in the middle of the night and wasted my time. Let's just go home." It was my husband's voice I heard, and when I looked over, I saw him sitting in a corner of the room, clearly frustrated. In the midst of my worry for my mother, I had forgotten he was there. I turned to him and said, "Please go home. You don't need to stay." Though my mother was unconscious, I worried that she might hear his harsh words. I didn't want him to add any more distress to the situation. Ignoring my plea, he grumbled loudly. "So she made me waste my time for what? She doesn't even have much money to leave behind. She was just a useless old hag until the end, wasn't she?" His words were hurtful and deeply disrespectful. After he left, my relatives, who had been worried about me, gathered around. I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and thanked them for their support. I assured them I was all right and that I had decided to divorce him. I returned home just as my husband was leaving for work, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. I immediately packed a box with clothes and essentials and delivered it to my uncle's house before leaving home with my personal belongings. To be honest, I had been secretly planning to divorce my husband when he reached retirement age in a few years. However, his callous comments at the hospital made me speed up my decision. I couldn't bear to live under the same roof as someone who would speak so disrespectfully about my mother. For the time being, I took a room at a business hotel and reached out to the lawyer I had been consulting. That night, my husband called my cell phone. "Hey, what's going on at home? Your mom's still in the hospital, right? You don't have to take care of her, do you? The funeral isn't even set yet. Why don't you come home and cook dinner?" I replied firmly, "Please leave me alone. I won't be coming home anymore, Victor. I'm divorcing you." He snickered and responded dismissively, "If you can do it, go ahead. You're just a housewife with a part-time job." Then he hung up. A few days later, however, he called again, but this time his tone was completely different. "What are these divorce papers and alimony demands?" His voice was filled with impatience. I remained calm and replied, "As I said, I'm divorcing you, and the alimony is justified for the mental anguish I've suffered because of you." "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I've endured your constant complaints." I calmly explained, "I've documented everything you've said and done in my diary and on my blog." My lawyer said this would be strong evidence. He seemed taken aback, clearly unaware that I had been preparing for this divorce behind his back. "What evidence?" he asked, confused. I responded firmly that any further communication regarding the divorce would need to go through my lawyer and ended the call. Shortly thereafter, my husband and I finalized the divorce. Our savings of $200,000 were divided. Since his share was equal to the amount of alimony for the emotional distress, we agreed that I would receive the full amount of the savings. Naturally, my husband resisted the terms from the start. "There's no such thing as a wife's share," he argued. "I earned that money. If you're taking over your useless mother's house, then that's mine too." Each time, my lawyer calmly explained the situation to him, pointing out that pursuing mediation or court would be costly. By emphasizing the potential legal fees, my lawyer managed to quiet my husband's objections. When everything was finally settled, my ex-husband bitterly complained, "You took all my money. How could you?" My lawyer looked at me with a pained expression and voiced his concerns about my well-being, though his words offered no comfort. To me, my ex's complaints felt like the desperate cries of a defeated man. Less than 2 months after the divorce was finalized, my mother passed away. I organized her funeral with the help of my relatives. Shortly after, I received a call from my uncle and his wife. They wanted to see me as soon as possible. I felt a bit nervous as I arrived at the restaurant to meet my uncle and his wife. Once seated, my uncle wasted no time getting straight to the point. "I received a call from Victor asking to borrow money," he began. "Given the circumstances of your divorce, I would have hung up on him immediately, but my wife answered the phone instead." "Yes, I was the one who spoke to Victor," his wife confirmed. "I was aware of the situation between you and Victor, including his outburst in the hospital room. I had no intention of lending him any money, but I was curious about what he had to say. I pretended to be sympathetic and asked him why he needed the money, acting as though I was fooled." "Why did he need money, though?" I asked, puzzled. My uncle explained, "Even though you got the couple's savings after the divorce, Victor still had a job and should have been earning enough. However, he's been gambling away his paycheck. When he ran short, he started borrowing from consumer credit companies. Naturally, he ran out of money, and his salary was being garnished. When his boss found out, he was let go. Victor took early retirement?" I said, astonished. "What a mess. But didn't he receive severance pay even though he retired early?" My uncle nodded. Yes, he did receive severance pay, which was actually an advance payment system. It was added to his salary and bonus a long time ago. The severance pay he received in advance was based on what he would have earned if he had worked until the official retirement age. Since he retired early, he had to repay the difference when he left. I was surprised. I didn't know he was taking advantage of the advance payment plan. I vaguely remember that he stopped showing me his pay stubs at some point. I'm sure that's when he started using that system. My uncle's wife added, "So after I listened to Victor, I told him, 'Oh my gosh, let me talk to my husband about this.' And then I hung up. It was quite entertaining." Later, I discovered that my ex-husband hadn't only called my uncle, but had reached out to all my relatives, asking them for money. How could any of my relatives lend him money? I thought, Even those who attended the wake and farewell ceremony knew about his outbursts in the hospital. I have no sympathy for my ex-husband. I guess he's run out of people to turn to. One day, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard my ex-husband's voice, a voice that sounded different from when we were married. It gave me goosebumps. "Hey, it's been a while. How's everything?" he asked. I replied, "I went to your mom's house recently. They're doing construction. Are you planning to live in it after the renovation?" "No," I said. "I'm renting it out. To be honest, I would have lived there myself. But since my ex-husband knew the location, I thought it might be dangerous, so I decided against it." I wasn't about to give him the full backstory. "Where are you living now?" he asked. "I'd never tell you. Well, it's a condo with a concierge at the entrance, so you can't just walk in," I replied. "A condo?" My ex-husband sounded stunned. It was no wonder. I had inherited a fortune from my mother that far exceeded the alimony I received. The story dates back to when my father passed away a few years ago. He was a tax accountant, and during his illness, he had asked a colleague in his profession to handle my mother and my inheritance. I had been concerned about my ex-husband's money management skills even before my father's death. To protect my inheritance, I had offered to disinherit my mother and claim my father's large estate without my ex-husband's knowledge. When my ex-husband inquired about my father's inheritance, I lied, telling him that it was negative due to the mortgage on the house and that I had renounced it. He seemed easily convinced and stopped asking about it. Now, having inherited everything from my mother, my assets were secure from him due to our divorce. My mother was a modest woman who preferred high-quality, simple clothing that lasted. I believe my ex-husband assumed she was poor and had no idea about my financial situation or my plans. I had no intention of informing him. He continued, "If you can afford a condo, why don't you lend me some money? After all, Sylvia, we even had a child together." I replied firmly, "The only thing I'm grateful for is that I met Melody. But that's all. You left me to raise her alone and always looked down on me. The time we spent together was unbearable. Do you really think I would help you?" He persisted, "Let's put the past behind us and get back together." "Absolutely not," I said. "Besides, you're a full-time employee, right? You must be earning well compared to a part-timer like me. And if you work for a few more years, you'll get a retirement bonus, won't you?" I said firmly, "If you're getting a retirement bonus, you better use it wisely." "Well then, goodbye." I finished my point and hung up, pretending not to know about his financial troubles. I felt ashamed of having been married to him and blocked his number to prevent any more calls. About 6 months later, my daughter Melody came to stay with me. As she admired my new place, which felt a bit too spacious for just one person, she said, "Mom, I love your new place. I wish I could live in a house like this someday." I replied, "Your place is nice too. You said you liked it." "That's true, but I can't afford a room like this with my salary," she admitted, taking a sip of her after-dinner coffee and smiling. Seeing her smile brought me a sense of peace. My ex-husband was rarely mentioned between us. "Mom," Melody said, "actually, there's someone I'd like you to meet." "Oh really? You have a boyfriend?" I asked, intrigued. "What's he like?" "Well, don't laugh," she said with a chuckle. "But he's a tax attorney." I laughed. "A tax attorney? How interesting." "There's more," Melody continued. "One day, I found a book on his bookshelf by the same author Grandpa used to read. I thought it was fate." I smiled warmly. What a lovely coincidence. Grandpa would be so pleased. Melody blushed slightly. I looked forward to the day when I would see her future husband standing beside her, sharing in her happiness.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "Alright, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.